Guys, well, apparently they knew what our attendance was going to be like today because they took out a third of the seating. We're a little short, which is very unfortunate because today's going to be discussion based. So you guys got to fill in for the people who aren't here, okay? Yeah, that's what it is. For those of you who can't see on the video, we've removed the first 5-ish rows of pews from the back. So yeah, we're getting there, yeah. It's okay. We got the chairs. We're getting there. So, all right. So today, like I said, it's actually going to be a little more discussion-based, less so lecture. We'll start with a little lecture and with a little lecture, but yeah, not much. So this class can be as long or as short as you guys want it to be. Caleb, give them a fair chance, okay? So yeah, today is Arguments of the Atheists. As promised, we are going to be looking at, not me talking today. I went on and found some TikTok videos and a few others, courtesy, I actually didn't find them, Braxton Hunter found them over at Trinity Bible Seminary and Trinity Radio. He likes responding to those things. I just kind of clipped them out of his videos. I'll post his stuff online with the page so you guys can see what somebody with a doctorate says regarding some of this stuff. So, all right. So the arguments of the atheists today, we're real quick, 2 points. We're going to talk about the types of arguments that atheists make and look at the arguments themselves. So the types of arguments, we're going to break it down. Pretty much, there's 5 different categories that you're going to get with these arguments. They're going to be arguments against God, arguments against the Bible, arguments against Jesus, arguments against Christianity, and arguments against Christians themselves. So these are going to be, pretty much everything you'll see is going to fall into these reasons. You'll notice there was kind of that progression that we made throughout the course so far. Now, the last 2 arguments against Christianity are going to be, apparently I didn't like the formatting, I didn't stick on that one. So that's going to be more against people complaining about the philosophies of Christianity. Like, I don't like it because I disagree that Christianity is a bad thing, right? As opposed to arguments against Christians, which is, the Christians are bad people. So we'll see a couple of different ones here. Okay, so here's the format for today. I'm going to play a video. Yeah, most of them, they're all under a minute long. And then we're going to establish what type of argument it is. We're going to break down the argument. Okay, we're less concerned with making the argument to people, the rhetorical aspects of it. That's going to be next week, where we talk about how to argue with people. Today, we're just talking more about the actual argument points. So it's going to be a little more formulaic. It doesn't matter how you come off. We're just talking about how it breaks down. Next week, it's going to be how you talk to people. And, because getting up in their faces and arguing with them and calling them names and stuff isn't a great way to argue with people or discuss with people. Today, we don't care about that. We can have a little more fun. So we're going to start with the type of argument. Which one of these categories does it fall into? Right here. Then we're going to figure out what the main point of their argument was. So, because sometimes that's easier to figure out than others. People like to talk around in circles and make all these different little points, and they're not always related to what their actual argument is. So we want to figure out how to break that down as we're listening as well. We're going to talk about what their points are to support their argument, if they make any. Some don't. And then we'll talk about our counterpoints. And when I say we, it's actually going to be we, because you guys are going to be the ones doing most of the talking today. Yeah? You're not setting a great precedent, guys. Okay. All right, so here, I'm even going to sit off to the side, because my back hurts today. All right, so here's our first.
There's no compelling reason to believe in the existence of God. And the fact that reasonable people like me don't believe in God is itself a reason not to believe in God. This is sometimes called the argument from hiddenness. As Friedrich Nietzsche so eloquently put it, a God who is all-knowing and all-powerful, but does not even make sure his creatures understand his intentions. Could that be a God of goodness, who allows countless doubts to persist for thousands of years, as though the salvation of mankind were unaffected by them, and who, on the other hand, holds out frightful consequences if any mistake is made as to the nature of truth? So despite my study of Scripture, my lifelong quest in philosophy, and living a relatively good life, I've never found a compelling reason to believe in God. Would a loving God allow me to remain in doubt? Why has he kept himself hidden from me? Could a loving God exist that will allow so many to suffer for lack of access to his revelations? So
that guy's got a lot of thoughts about himself. All right, so what kind of argument? What's the type? That was pretty easy, right? A type against, yeah. So he's making an argument against God's existence. What was his main point? What was his main argument? Did you guys catch it? So his argument, one of the arguments he used was argument from hiddenness. That's the formal name of it. His main argument was that God didn't exist. And what were his points?
Because people were suffering and you have to search for him and he's not around.
Yeah, that was one of his secondary points that he made. What was the point that he was trying to prove that showed him that God didn't exist?
I know he said, why are people constantly in doubt?
Okay.
He says
Because
he had
God's not telling us what he wants.
Okay, that was part of it, yeah. What else did you guys glean out of there?
Didn't he say it was like happy or something? He was fine with the way things were going for himself?
I didn't catch that part.
Yeah, he said that at the end. He's kind of happy. Yeah, he said he was happy with the
Okay.
way, like, apparently that's not the answer.
Maybe. So the points that I got out of there was that he is such a reasonable person. He has worked through all of these things, and yet God still hasn't revealed himself to me. I am so reasonable. If I don't believe in God, then you shouldn't either, because I've worked through these things, and I'm being reasonable about this stuff. On his end, that's a very nice way to argue the point. How would you guys argue against that? What would be some points that we've talked about or that you can think of yourself? Got to have faith, yeah. That maybe not always the most, yeah.
God makes himself known through creation.
Yes, there are a lot of ways that you can see God in the world around us. So, what are some of the ways we've discussed that?
I mean, that's why I hate getting into argument or topics like this with people who don't believe, because they always have an answer for no matter what I say.
And that's part of what we're going to talk about next week is how to direct that conversation, because they're always going to keep going off in different directions and changing. Goalpost shifting is what that's called.
You can say, look at the ocean. You can't, every time I go, how can anybody not believe in a God, but then they'll have a reason why it's there. I mean, yeah, so, but like she said, you just have to have faith.
Yeah, and I do agree with that. It's just not always the most convincing argument, unfortunately.
Right, it's just hard to argue that.
Across simple-minded, like he's just kind of like, just dumb. He's just real simple.
He came across real simple, and do you think that maybe have been what he was trying to do?
He was like, he just wouldn't like.
To get you to endear yourself to him?
All of his points were about his perspective and his search in philosophy and things like that. But you can make arguments for the existence of God through science, through observation, and through philosophy. It's amazing that you want to say that you studied philosophy, but there's no compelling arguments about God. When most philosophers, at least early philosophers, a lot of it was about God. So you're not studying too hard.
Yeah, we spent
Quoting Nietzsche.
We spent 2 hours just talking about reasonable stuff between the first 2 weeks about God's existence and the philosophy around it. So that's a fair point. This guy is what is called a non-resistant non-believer. So he's convinced himself that, listen, if I saw the evidence for it, I would believe. So if I don't believe, that's evidence in its own right. That's his primary argument. And so what he's not realizing, and he would probably accuse somebody who's arguing against him of this, is his own personal bias. Well, he's already inclined not to believe because those are what his biases are. So I think that's an important point to remember too. And it's okay to call that out sometimes. All right, what's that?
What I don't understand is there's not always proof to everything. You I've never seen $1 million. I
Have you
wish
ever
I
seen $1 million?
had. But I personally haven't, but it doesn't.
I've seen $1 million spent before.
It's like people always want proof.
Yeah.
So,
That kind of gets into the God of the gaps, and we're going to talk about that in a minute too. So I like.
I think that a lot of times logical people
Mhm.
have a hard time accepting God because it's not logical.
Not in the way that they're reasoning to wrap their brains around.
Right.
As we've talked a lot about, I think, in here how logical God can be. From he used the word a lot, reasonableness, if you're working through these things. And admittedly, we have our own biases that way too. And it's important to recognize that. But just because you recognize your bias or have a bias towards something, because everybody has a bias towards something, doesn't mean that you can't make an argument with somebody else. Because everybody's got a bias, so they're arguing too. All right. So this next one is actually from a series. There's a few of them from this series in here. It's a top 10.
Number 10, poorly designed universe. Don't the theists say that God is perfect and the creator of the universe? Well then, why did he design the universe and his babies in such poor fashion? We weren't in a hurry to land on Earth. We could have stayed in his creation lab for some more time, if only to become refined beings. If God exists, and it's him who has created us with diseases and malfunctions, do we have a reason to worship him?
Do we? I don't know. All right, so what's his main point? What type of argument is it? Again, yeah, it's against God. What was the main argument they wanted to make? Well, yeah, why didn't God make everything perfect?
he did.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're not countering yet. We're just looking at what his points are. Yeah, so the universe is poorly designed. It couldn't be made by God. So what were his points? What were some of the points that the universe is poorly designed? Yeah, disease, sickness, what else? Anything? You can feel free to make some points for him if you want to from that argument, if you can think of any. What's not perfect about our world?
Some people suffer more than others.
Yeah, there's suffering. Anything else? Yeah, that one's pretty simple. All right, so what are the counterpoints we're going to make against that? What's one we talked about week 2 when we talked about arguments for God? You guys remember? About whether or not the universe is designed well. You guys remember? It's called the argument was the fine-tuning argument.
It's like one,
Yeah.
like, I don't know what word you use, but and just a little bit off, it would work.
Yeah, any of those millions to the nth power variables, if you just put it off by just that much, the universe wouldn't support life.
The thing of it is the universe has started to decay from the time of the fall in the garden.
Right. So that's the other argument. So the two arguments is A, the universe actually is really well designed from a standpoint of life, because if it weren't, life wouldn't even be able to exist, period, let alone exist in a way that's less than ideal. And then the second point would be, well, we kind of have an answer for that too, because ideally life started in a perfect sense, and it's going to end in a perfect sense too. We know that in our understanding of the universe as well. But because of stuff that happened, we're in a point where it doesn't.
Romans 8:22 through 24, that area, basically says that the earth is moaning and groaning in anticipation of the coming of Christ. And there's other scriptures that back that up.
Yeah. I mean, that's something to consider as well. So we know the world's not perfect. We kind of have addressed that a few times already in our own belief system. So if you're going to make arguments against our belief system, don't make arguments that our belief system's already making, right? Just a thought. Okay, so let's see what the next one is.
Was Jesus really a cool guy? Was he? Now I ask that as someone who really wants to believe Jesus was a cool guy. I am an ex-Christian. I am an atheist. I do not believe in any of it. I do believe that Jesus may have been a historical person, but he was not a deity in any sense of the word. But our society has really propped up this image of Jesus, even for those that aren't Christian. People say, oh, Jesus was actually a really good guy. It's his followers that are the problem. And although, yes, his followers are the problem, Jesus died a long time ago. I don't know that Jesus was as great as people claim him to be. And I go back and forth on this. Because yes, Jesus was all about love and compassion and turning the other cheek. But he was also kind of a cult leader. And he was going around telling people to hate their parents, leave home, sell all their things because tomorrow God was coming back. He was an apocalypticist. He literally believed the world was ending. And he was also really confused about how fig trees work. Anyway, I'm not so convinced he was so great.
I mean, she's kind of humorous. But
She had some ideas.
Apocalypse a word.
I'm not entirely sure. She was trying for a real word. I'll give her that. But yeah, like I said, we can make fun today. This is okay. So she had some ideas. What was her what type of argument? It was against Jesus. Yeah, and her main point. Yeah, Jesus isn't worth following, and so the point's because of that. Yeah, he wasn't a cool guy. He was. Yeah, he was a cult leader. He was an apocalyptist. He was, which is in scholastic circles a view of Jesus. Oh yeah, no, he was just a guy that was always about the end of the world, leading a cult about that. So yeah, she had all these things. Yeah, the fig tree is the fig tree out of bloom and doesn't produce fruit, so he kills it. That was how fig trees don't work, because the fig tree would have been in bloom that time. That was arguing against the analogy and not the point that Jesus was making. All right, so what kind of counterpoints are we going to make? Was Jesus a cool guy, first off?
Yes.
Obviously. I mean, you don't wear your hair that long, big beard like that if you're not cool, for starters.
Not that many people would
John
follow
Calvin
you.
copied him. I mean,
If you weren't cool, they wouldn't follow you.
Right? I don't know. There's some, I don't know. Going back to the cult leader thing, there's some weird cult leaders. That was last week too.
Getting some branch Davidian going on here.
Here, stay away from Pam's Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So, but let's go back. So, was Jesus good to people? Yeah. Did he do good things for people? I mean, even if you pull the religious aspect out of it, he went around healing people and helping people and feeding people and doing these things for people and encouraging people. So she started hitting on the sell everything and leave your family. Da, da, da. Yeah, hate your parents. And Jesus did say that.
He said you will leave your mother, and he didn't say you would hate them.
Oh, no, he did. He did.
Oh.
He definitely said you. But what was the point he was making when he said that? Right. Know where your priorities are. Because sometimes, the point he was making was that if you follow me, the people around you may not follow me too, and you're going to have to decide. So there may be some animosity there over those sorts of things. It wasn't, I'm a Christian now, I hate you, Mom.
Yeah, it's what I said, but she just kind of fell short on why you go that direction.
Did you catch? Yeah, did you catch her appeal to authority too? She made an appeal to her own authority. She's like, I'm an ex-Christian, I'm an atheist now. I was a Christian, so I know this stuff. You should listen to me because I was a Christian.
I think she skipped Sunday school a lot.
Yeah. It is very interesting. A lot of these people who argue against Christianity, especially some of the points that she made, often tend to hold themselves in high regards in their analysis of reading and all that stuff. And like, you guys can't even read this literature, even if it wasn't true as we understand it to be. Like, that's just literature. Reading the symbolism and the analogs and the metaphors in there, like, you're not understanding these very simple concepts.
Well, that's the biggest thing about the TikTok atheists, though. For the most part, there's some that are compelling but it's all rhetoric and it's all hollow, and they can't make their own points or justify their own stance without mischaracterizing the entire thing to begin with. So, I mean, that is something where social media is entirely guilty of that.
I agree with you, but there's two reasons why I'm showing these. A, they kind of deal in the extremes and they allow us to kind of go the full Monty on these arguments. And two, while it is an exaggeration, it's really not that far off how from the average person argues.
Absolutely. Well, because they mimic what they see on social media.
Right. Yeah, Caleb, not everybody sits there philosophic like you and I all day. Yeah.
Nuts.
Sorry. Next time he gets that way, Katie, just send him to me. It's fine. We'll deal with him.
I'm really good at watching TV and I can't
There you go. See, that's all he needs. Is just those audibles, those audible active listening cues. That's a little bit of next week too, right? We'll talk about active listening. All right, let's take a look at the next
Best
one.
things about being agnostic. Number one, the incredible feeling of releasing guilt. See, when you're a Christian, you believe that you are guilty from the second you were born. You are completely and utterly sinful. There's nothing you can do about it. No matter how hard you try, you are always going to be a sinner in need of salvation. And you literally can't go a day without sinning is the basic belief. Now, if you happen to be something of a perfectionist like I am, that's really hard to accept, knowing that no matter how hard you try, it will never be good enough. So realizing that I wasn't always guilty and that was just a construct, it was the most incredible weight off my shoulders, feeling like I could just live for a change.
No, that was one of her 5. The other 4 weren't really that great, so I didn't use them. They were worse than that. I know, but it's a point that a lot of people like to make. Speaking of, so what was her type of argument?
No matter what you do, you can't do it right. Just get a Christian.
Against Christianity? Yeah, it's kind of right on the cusp there of Christians and Christianity, but I voted for Christianity. So what was her main argument? What does Christianity do? Yeah, she has a really Calvinist skewed view of Christianity, for starters. So that being said, so I considered her main point to be that Christianity is a guilt trip. Yeah. So guilt is bad.
I've actually had conversations with people who tell me Christianity is a psychological tool to keep you in line. Similar to Christianity is a guilt trip. I like that. I'm going to use that to serve my I appreciate it.
There you go. Yeah. So what were the points that she used for that? Outside of being a really poor understanding of what Christianity is.
She could be perfect.
Yeah.
She's a perfectionist.
Yeah, she's a perfectionist.
She's a perfectionist, and so because of the rules of Christianity, it forces on you to feel guilty. We'll get on that in a second. She can't live right because it just creates all this anxiety. What else? What were some of her?
That's where she went off track. Was because it went from the Calvinist original sin view to a works-based salvation, which for all of Calvinism sins, it's not work-based.
Yeah, she
weird
took a
how
little
they
from
just
here
went
and a
this
little
way.
from over here and
Yeah.
syncretized them. Yeah, that's a good point. Taking the worst of Christianity all around from our perspective. Anyway, got to be fair. Anything else, you guys?
How hard she tries, she wouldn't be good enough.
Right. Yeah. Her point was she had to, Christianity's got all these rules. And you got to follow all the rules because that's what Christianity is about.
She doesn't want to humble herself and understand that she was going to make mistakes.
Ooh, now we're psychologizing. All right, so moving into the counterpoints. We'll start over here. You guys were saying that's not what Christianity is, right? Christianity is actually guilt-free, mostly. I mean, you should feel ashamed of some of the bad things you've done, but it doesn't, we don't have to worry about it because it's paid for.
Under conviction of a sin to being in a guilt trip about it, right? If I sin, the Spirit calls me out on it, and I'm under conviction, I have a way to atone and come back into grace. It's not like, now I'm guilty. I stubbed my toe and I took Pam's name in vain, and now I'm going to like burn in hell.
Yeah, it seems like when
Oh,
Tom Leeds taught one of the Bible studies, we went over shame and guilt.
Yes, I was really bummed that Tom's not here tonight.
And shame and guilt are three different things completely. Shame and guilt are not.
Right. She's primarily associating it with shame using the word guilt based off of the definitions that Tom gave us during the mental health one we did. Yeah. Yeah, so she's really, yeah, and then there's the psychologizing thing. So have you guys ever noticed how against points made against Christians or just people who have like cultural standards like the way that we do, we always get called out and like, oh, you're just doing this. And it's always against the point that, well, yeah, we have standards. That's why those standards can be broken. This side, the standards don't exist. You guys just kind of do whatever you want. So that's where this guilt aspect comes in as well. So if you have standards to break, then yeah, there could be that guilt factor. But if you just live however you feel is right, I think we talked about that a little bit last week, where if your God agrees with you on everything and you don't disagree with your God on anything, who's your God really, right? So we see that a lot in secularist worldviews. And I'd like to note she calls herself an agnostic, not an atheist. You guys know the difference on those 2 points?
They believe there's a God, but not the God that we believe.
Not necessarily. So an atheist says absolutely there is no such thing as God. That a God does not exist. An agnostic says, I don't know. We talked last week about Gnosticism a little bit. Gnosticism comes from the root word knowledge, right? To know, gnosis. So an agnostic, that preceding A means anti. It's not. There is no knowledge. I don't have that knowledge. So, all right, here's the next one.
Number 9, God of Gaps. Hey, believers over there. We agree with you, and here's how. Now that we have your attention, could you explain the idea of God of Gaps? That is your argument of his existence. You somehow prove God's existence by pointing out phenomenon that science can't explain, and hence they're facilitated by God. In ancient times, Greeks believed Poseidon to be behind earthquakes, but it's now been proved as scientific activity. Can our lack of knowledge about the universe substitute for the existence of another force? That's not very convincing.
All right, so we talked a minute ago about God of gaps. So that's what this argument was. So what is the God of the gaps argument? So obviously it's an argument against God. So what is the God of the gaps argument? You guys know? So the God of the gaps argument states that, well, you don't actually, you just throw God into the areas that you can't explain. So, that must be God. So it's that gap in your knowledge. The main argument that he's making here is that God is just an excuse to explain away what we don't know. So those points kind of made themselves, Thor is lightning, and Poseidon was earthquakes, and how you just say that creation was God. All these other things are God. What are some counterpoints to that? Some we've talked in this class, some we'll have to work our way through. Because again, this was just a very intro course. How would we counter some of those points for a God of the gaps argument? Huh?
Depends on how snarky you feel.
Well, we can be snarky today.
The science of the gaps is a thing too, where it's literally if you point out contradictions in scientific theories or the way that science, especially when it comes to evolution and things like that, goes against its own laws, they'll be like, science just hasn't advanced to the point where we can explain it yet. So it's still science of the gaps, which is still a thing.
Or some of the theories to explain how God isn't there, specifically, even though there's no, the infinite parallel universe theory of creation that we talked about, or string theory and all this type of stuff. The string theory is not horrible, but it gets a little weird. There's the science of the gaps concept. So the point that I think the strongest point that we can make is that as Christians, as intellectually honest Christians, some probably don't go this way all the time, but it's not that we throw God wherever we can't explain it. It's that we put God where it makes sense to put God. So a good example is when we talked week 1, the Kalam. Who remembers what the Kalam argument was? The cosmological argument of creation. That's one a lot of people actually works really well as an opening point for a lot of people. It's the Kalam cosmological argument was that the universe can't come from nothing, right? You've got time, space, and matter. Time, space, and matter have to come from somewhere that is outside of time, outside of space, and is not material. And then we start throwing in the ideas that the universe seems like it was designed in a lot of ways, and it makes sense and works, so that thing that's outside of space, outside of time, and is non-material is also incredibly intelligent to the point where it can do this. Some might say all-knowing. What does that sound like it describes to us? Thor? I don't know, man. I've seen the Thor movies. Thor is not very intelligent. What was that, Katie? A little louder for me.
I heard what she said, and she's right.
He sure is cute.
He has a
Beautiful, yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he is.
Fair enough. See, double standards, man. If we were to throw this argument the other way,
Anyway, Captain America's better.
he is.
I mean, well, it depends on if Thor has long hair or short hair.
I don't know. You get Captain America with the beard and Endgame, man.
Come on.
Anyway, Nomad.
I think they're
That's what it
replacing
was.
him too, man.
Like the press story. Can relate to the press story.
With the big belly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I didn't mean it that way.
All of these are very good counterpoints.
Yeah. So the answer was God. The answer was God. So yeah, God fills those blanks, right? The way we understand God. No, I'll take it.
Last week was snakes. This week it's Thor.
I am still so disappointed I did not record last week. I forgot to hit the record button if you're not aware, and so all of that great conversation we had was lost to the ether. And
Remember it, there's a church where you go and play with snakes.
yes, there was.
Move on quick.
Yeah, before we start going down that
Number
road.
4, religion runs in family. If we ask you about your religion, there's a 99% chance that you follow the religion of your family, because that's what you have been taught. But what is your understanding of how to worship God? All you know is derived from your ancestors, and it has been in the generations. You did not analyze the facts to decide which religion goes with your definition of God. The mere scenario of tightly bound family religion questions the truth in it because you can analyze facts but not fables. It can also be seen as a belief sustained by social pressure or even threats. The whole idea of religion seems scary now. Yikes.
Well, yeah. I'm going to vote against. Oh, that wasn't nice. Against Christians. Yeah, that all came down there. That happens. His main argument is Christians only believe because that's what they know. I think that was kind of the easiest way to sum that one up. Since we resolved all of that one. What were his points on that?
Kind of follows suit.
Yeah, we don't actually think. We just go with what we're told because that's what we've known the whole way we've grown up. We don't question anything.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis totally wasn't an atheist. Right.
Right. And so the first argument against that would be, well, what about people who didn't start their life as believers or around believers? Okay. What are some other arguments with that? And you could go down that road kind of a couple different ways too.
It's true, it doesn't disprove Christianity.
Yeah. I made a point on one of our Facebook groups the other day about how, even if the Bible itself, as it's recorded, weren't true, that would we could prove that, and it still wouldn't affect Christianity outside of the gospel, because the fact that Jesus died and atoned for our sins and saved the world as we know it is still a fact of history, as we've discussed here. So the fact that happened it doesn't matter if the Bible is, this came from a young earth creation versus an old earth debate, and it was like, people who put so much emphasis on that, it doesn't necessarily matter. All of it can be wrong, and it still doesn't change the historical fact of the atonement. So who here believes exactly how they grew up believing? The way their family did? Okay. Yeah. Okay, and some people do. I don't. I was raised quasi-Catholic.
I was raised as a Calvinist. So.
Well, see, there you go. That's a departure. And so you grew up, you're very indie, yeah. You were very IFB growing up. Katie, what was your background?
Lutheran Presbyterian.
Okay, so you're not super far off, but you're in the, it's...
The Presbyterian, in my family, was more lenient, and
Yeah, the Presbyterians can go a couple different directions, so yeah.
I just kind of, but my grandmother was Lutheran, and it was a lot more strict, and so like in between the both was a good.
Yeah, and a lot of people grow up, even if they claim Christianity, grow up culturally Christian, but they actually learn Christ and then go in a completely different direction. I've got a friend who grew up culturally Christian, and then she kind of moved away from her family, got married, and really found Christianity, and now she's one of those, if you ask her parents. But she would fit in perfectly well in just any kind of general evangelical group, more or less. So, yeah. So, yeah, that one...
But we don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't learn and we don't grow.
Yeah, and that was the other thing is, did you guys notice the air of superiority that came across in there too? It was, no, you guys don't question anything. You guys don't think about anything. But I do, because I'm an atheist, so I came up with it. So it's okay to call people out on that stuff as you're discussing. There are ways to do it that work better than others, but sometimes you got to be mean too. It's okay. Okay, so this one's a little hard to see. Me confused as to why. This one has to do with free will. I'm sorry. It talks about how in Exodus, God hardened Pharaoh's heart and didn't give him a choice, so he couldn't. The plagues had to come down on Egypt and all that other stuff because God hardened Pharaoh's heart and didn't give him a choice. Caleb, I know what road you're going to go down. Give them a chance first. Okay, so that argument was against God, by and large. My clicker's going a little crazy today. And I just explained the main argument. God doesn't allow for free will. So, what are some points? I know we couldn't see all of that. What are some points that you could make for that one in this case? So, Calvinists, they're like, yeah, you guys get it. Proper Christians disagree. So in this case, it's, if God is omnipotent and knows everything, he's got to tell everybody what to do so that everything works this way. How would we counter that? Anybody have any thoughts on this one? This one's a little trickier, and I may have put it in just for Caleb. Caleb, go down that road.
Calvinism is not the only voice of Christianity, so I apologize you were raised that way, but let's look at this logically instead of Calvinistically.
Okay, so what you got, buddy? Is that all you got?
What,
Are you going to go into the word study?
Free will exists.
Are you going to go into the word study?
Maybe, but I would actually have to study it first.
Fair enough. Okay, I'll go into the word study on that one. Surprised you don't know this one off the top of your head. So, what's interesting is when you start looking at the word where Pharaoh's heart was hardened in the Bible, and this is what we talked about a couple weeks when we were talking about the different ways of studying the Bible, where, yeah, you can understand the Bible pretty well just reading it at its face value, but as you start looking into the cultural stuff, it really opens up a lot of different venues for you. So what's interesting here is the word harden. If you look at the cultural understanding of that in Hebrew, do you know where I'm going yet? Still don't? Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I know Hebrew.
Jacob lost for words.
Right?
I'm not teaching
I feel like I accomplished something today. Okay, so the Hebrew word that we've translated to harden in its context refers more to encouraging or strengthening or building up. So what was going on was God was giving Pharaoh the resolve to do what Pharaoh already wanted to do. So God needed Pharaoh to not agree so that certain things could happen, right? There are larger things at stake than
That's
surpassing the
back
word.
to the scripture, it- I think what it was Pharaoh went to that point where God just turned him over to his own reprobate mind.
Kind of, yeah. And now you have to go a little deeper into Scripture to figure that out. And so that's kind of, based just on that passage without the knowledge, the cultural knowledge of what some of those words mean versus how we understand the way it's translated, it gives you a little more insight into things and answers some of the harder questions. So, yeah, and we can go back to the free will argument that we had a few weeks ago, right, where it was, we can prove free will exists because of God existing. That's something as well. And vice versa, we know that God can exist because we know free will exists, contrary to what some people may say. All right, here's our next one.
To hate Christians. I know Christians thrive on their persecution victim mentality, but please educate yourself. Christians are hated solely in the fact that they're hypocrites. They don't practice what they preach. They don't live Christ-like lives. They don't act like Christians. They don't know their histories. They don't know their theologies. They don't grasp that people are upset and hate them because their religion that they practice is an appropriation off of another religion and other cultures. Every practice and everything they do is stolen. And then they turn around and condemn and demonize those cultures and those religions they stole from. And then, on top of it all, they hide behind their God to justify their hatred and bigotry. And it's gross. And it needs to stop. It's gross.
It's gross, guys. It's gross. That is an ad hominem attack, which I know I already said is okay today. But be aware of that. Okay, so the type of argument, I heard Pam say it, it's against Christians. Okay. And her main argument was?
Basically, we're hypocrites.
Yeah, Christians are the problem. For all of the world's issues, it all comes back to Christianity. They're the issue.
Culturally appropriated other religions and then demonized those religions.
Yes, a wonderful understanding of both theology and history and anthropology. She really thought she knew a lot.
I agree with her first half.
There were some valid points, and that's where things get tricky sometimes. Is that it's okay to concede points.
I got confused as when the light came on. Did you wash your face? Like, why?
Oh, yeah.
Well, and come on, you know TikTok. You can cut things in and out, and so the TV came on or the flash on the camera decided it wasn't picking up the piercings quite as well. The algorithm picked it up. Not my thing. Whatever. I don't. I'm not going to get off the point. The point is to save souls. Souls have piercings too.
But that is a lot of argument against, at least people I know that aren't Christians, they say the same thing. I've been to church and I've seen the people act like that. And you can you can understand their point.
Yeah, what was Gandhi's thing? It's like, I love you, Christ, I hate you, Christians.
Right. So,
I'm paraphrasing. But, you can concede the point that, there are a lot of crappy Christian people out there.
yeah.
So, you're right about that one. I'll acknowledge that point. So then what do? We'll start on the hypocrisy point. We can get to the other points in a minute.
Yeah.
Some of the counterpoints you see, I guess getting ahead of that is, I've seen the meetings where if you've been hurt by the church, remember you were hurt by the people within the church, not by God.
Yeah. But going back to the guilt video, the whole point of Christianity is that we're not perfect people, okay? The healthy don't need a hospital. Somebody important said that once, right? Probably in Aramaic, but whatever. Or the original King James. I don't know which one.
Probably that.
Yeah, okay. We're Christians because we need to be saved from ourselves. So yeah, we're not perfect. If we've got all perfect people in the church, then the church ain't doing a really good job of what they're doing. They're supposed to be doing. As far as the stolen religion, no, we are not a stolen religion. We are an evolved religion, a reformed religion of Judaism. So, yeah, and it's okay. And the whole point of, if you look at our founding people within it, Jesus said, go out to all the world. The apostles, he had a big argument over whether or not to include Gentiles. And like, no, the boss man said, right? Again, paraphrasing. So, yeah, we're not a stolen religion. Now, have we cultural appropriation? I like that one, where we touched on that a little bit last week when we started talking about some of the Catholic background and things. And yeah, there was some ways to tweak culture so that it was easier for them to become Christians. But yeah, by and large, it's just those darn white imperialists colonizing all the brown people.
I would just ask her to be specific on what exactly is appropriate.
Ooh.
Right.
Tell me.
That's another really good point. And we'll talk about, again, more next week when we do this, hopefully. Set your definitions, okay? The best way to control a conversation is to ask questions and hold people accountable for the claims that they make. So a good way to do that is, what do you mean by?
Right.
Can you elaborate that on a little more? Can you tell me, I want to make sure we're understanding this word the same way. Can you give me your definition of this word and how it applies here? The easy way to kind of box them into a corner and make them explain their stuff, and they can in turn bring out the own holes in their argument, right? Okay, what's the next one? Let's see. Oh, this is
Jesus Christ never existed and doesn't exist.
Jesus Christ never existed and doesn't exist. Do you guys remember my instructions on this argument? Laugh. This is the one where you can laugh in their face, okay? So the type of argument was against Jesus, yes. That was a tricky one. His main argument was
He has a white hair. Oh, wait, no.
Jesus didn't exist. No, that was the argument that he made. What were his points? He didn't make any. He didn't make any points. He made a statement. And again, I'm not just like clipping this. Like the whole thing was like, Jesus doesn't exist. And then he goes, doesn't exist. So what are our counterpoints on this one? Laughing at them, yes. You're an idiot. Quote.
Why do you not think he exists?
Yes, ask the questions. Ask the questions. So even if he gives his reasons, the mythicism theory and all that stuff, what are your points? Okay, we want to make sure we've got a strong argument before we start dealing with that. So how do we know Jesus, even if he wasn't the Christ and all that, how do we know that he was actually an historical figure? Yeah, we had the Bible, yeah. Yeah, we had a whole bunch of them that we had a lot of fun with.
It's not only the Bible, but other secular witnesses.
Right, do you guys remember some of the ones we talked about?
Josephus.
Yeah, that's a gimme, yeah. Josephus was a big one, huh? Philo, we didn't talk about Philo. But yeah, that's fine too. Tacitus, we talked about Tacitus. We talked about the one comedian guy who like made fun of Christians, but made fun of us really well. Like he yeah. So that was like
Pretty much every
fair.
major scholar, even atheist scholars, agree that Jesus Christ did exist.
Yeah, I'll post the links to the video I pulled these out of where the guy that I follow was responding to a lot of them. And actually following this one, he goes, you know what, we're just going to do a musical montage. And it's just a big montage of all these scholars, and very well-known scholars. Who's the one? I'm drawing a blank on his name. Bart Ehrman. It's Bart Ehrman who is like the pivotal, if he can prove the Bible's not true, he's going to prove the Bible's not true. And he's like the pivotal, he's the main liberal Bible scholar, okay, New Testament scholar. And it's this clip of him saying, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Jesus Christ did not exist. Every single scholar out there who understands what they're looking at in any way, shape, or form will tell you that Jesus, as a man, did exist. And so, like, even the dude who would prove it wrong if he could, because he'll tell you that most of what Jesus said in the Bible, as it's recorded, it wasn't actually said. But he'll tell you that Jesus was actually a person. Which, again, is why you get to laugh at the guy. I'm okay with that one. When even the people who disagree with us vehemently on everything else agree with us on this one, it's okay to laugh at the guy.
Should not say to atheists. First one, where do you get your morality from? Don't assume that because we're atheists, we don't have morals. We all have morals. We all have ethics. Ours don't derive from a holy book. And I would hope that your Bible isn't the only reason you're not out there killing everybody in sight.
So his morals don't come from a holy book from some old man with a beard in the sky. Or do they? So type of argument, there's a couple different arguments for this one. What would you guys say? Against the Bible. I think he in particular was talking against the Bible. It could be against God. Remember that whole argument for God's existence is the fact that morality exists. It could be against Christianity in general. So I threw against God because really that it all boils down back to him. If God doesn't exist, morals don't exist. His main argument was morality exists without God, according to him. I ask, well, how do you know that's wrong then? We had that big conversation a few weeks ago. How do you show that morality exists without God? What's morality based off of?
Because he doesn't believe God, he's moral, so therefore God.
Okay, sure. So, but where does his moralities come from?
His morals come from culture.
Okay. So his culture right now in this point in time. So if a different culture says it's okay to kill everybody in sight, is that okay then? Or is it still wrong? Sorry, I'm not supposed to ask tough questions, Caleb says.
Morality exists without God, then at that point in time, yes.
Okay.
If morality, we change, we go to a purge society, and we're all going crazy a couple nights a year.
You really want to do that, though? Because you bring that up a lot.
No, but it's a great example. Glenda.
It's moral or ethic, no matter which way you word it. Isn't it more about the fall and the Garden of Eden?
I mean, as we understand it, yes. Yeah, that's.
Oh, you couldn't even.
But yeah.
I have to learn how to do
But how, if you were in his position, how would you answer that question? How do you know that is wrong or right? Yeah.
They would probably say the law. I don't know.
Well, slavery was in the law at one point, as chattel slavery. You could rape your wife. That was legal for a long time. Some areas it probably still is in the U.S. What about our laws versus some Arabic laws in the Middle East or laws over in China? Or how do we know those things are wrong or right? Are there some things that are universally immoral? Okay, one more video.
If the universe wasn't created 6,000 years ago, then a bunch of Christians I've heard talk about the age of the earth are just wrong.
Watch this one
Well, okay. What are we doing here?
Number 6, existence of evil. When believers say that there's a God, a power which is noble and good, then do they forget the existence of evil in the world? Be logical. When God loves us so dearly, then why does he allow evil to exist? If there is God, who allows wars and riots to take place and destroy his creation when by all means he can stop it? Then he is at least not worth worshiping.
Sorry, that one didn't cut apparently the way I wanted it to. All right. So what type of argument?
Argument against God.
Yep, it was arguments against God. What was his main argument?
Why would God allow bad stuff to happen
Bad stuff.
if he loves us so much?
Yeah. So if evil exists, there's no God, right?
But he doesn't allow it to happen. That's what I was saying. I mean,
Well, is God all powerful or not?
yeah.
Goes back to free will.
Yeah. It's not perfect.
Again, this is one where the Calvinists and us have very different approaches to this conversation. The Calvinists would say that evil happens, that God actually decrees the evil to happen because actively decrees and says, I want this particular evil to happen to either glorify him or extend his plans further. I can kind of agree a little bit on the second one because God's not a reactionary entity, but yeah, that's the points we made that. Counterpoints. You guys got anything? I've got another slide after this. We're going to talk about this because we didn't actually cover this one in the class yet.
God flooded the earth to get rid of evil, and I think sometimes people forget that he tried many times to get rid of evil, and that was one of the ways that he did do it.
Yeah.
And it popped back up.
Yeah, God declares himself that he doesn't will evil to happen. Calvinists.
Well, at least he's making a point that literally nobody in Christianity has ever struggled with or written entire books about.
I know we haven't. He got us. We haven't figured that point out yet before.
You gotta channel that Jonathan Pritchett.
All right, which is fun. Jonathan Pritchett is. You saw Braxton Hunter there, the bald guy at the beginning that I didn't cut out. That time, that's his co-host. They're ornery. They're fun. So we're going to talk about real quick the problem of evil because this is one we didn't talk about. We could spend 2 days at least on this one, but we're not going to. Not this time. Maybe another time. The problem of evil arguments for the problem of evil are called theodicies, not the story that Homer wrote. So this one's a little different. There's a couple different theodicies out there. There's the free will theodicy, which means if we have free will and can choose, one option's going to be evil. Like, you can't have free will and not have the option, right? So there's that. The character building theodicy, there could be a purpose behind the evil sometimes. People are built up out of hardships, right? Those, even if it's not necessarily evil, but just bad things that happen, good things come out of it sometimes, okay? Another big one is the heaven theodicy. That says that evil is a result of the fall, okay? We've addressed this in our belief system. We know that it's not what we want it to be, but because that we're not in this ideal setting anymore, it's not going to be there. However, in heaven and in the new creation, we can talk about that concept another time, there is going to be no evil, okay? We started without the evil because of our own actions as a race. It happened. God's going to correct it eventually, okay? One way or another. So there's arguments against these things. I'm not going super in depth with them because it's already 8:02. And I really didn't want to go past 8 weeks. If I went past 8 weeks, this would have been probably week 9, or would have been the topic that took us over it, because it's a really important one that people have to deal with in their thoughts about God. So yeah, that's something to look into. You can look it up as the problem of evil, or if you want to use the big word theodicy, and you can go a little deeper on those concepts as well. So that's all I have for today. You guys got any thoughts on anything beyond what we've already talked about? I know I made you talk a lot today. I'm sorry. You guys got anything? All right. So next week, it's going to be our last week. We're going to talk, at least for this chunk of series, if we ever do something in the future, maybe we'll see. But we're going to talk about how to actually have these conversations and then the theory behind getting people to change their mind. So how to control conversations, how to talk to people, and how the step-by-step theory to take, the things that you need to consider before you're ever going to have any impact on the way somebody thinks.